graphic organizers turn learning into a visual adventure that captivates and educates students. I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. For more information about literacy, please like and subscribe. So Vanessa was a young special education teacher, and she's kind of at a loss of what to do with George. George was a student in a class that she did inclusion with. In other words, she went in that class and helped students who were struggling. And George had very, very low levels of literacy. He was intellectually disabled, which meant that he had a low IQ, and it was very hard for him to do a lot of tasks. But one day she decided that she was going to try something that she had read about, which was a new thing, and that was to use graphic organizers. So the middle school teacher that she worked with, George was in the 7th grade, and the teacher that she worked with asked her to work with George to do a chart and to understand a story that was in their book. And George just didn't understand the story. It was a very hard story to understand, and they just didn't know what to do. And so Vanessa sat down with George, and she did a chart with him, and they were able to do the chart. And the teacher was just absolutely amazed that George could understand the story, because again, George had a lot of intellectual problems. And that's just an example of the power of graphic organizers. So what are graphic organizers? So graphic organizers are tools that you use to understand a text. So I'm going to show right here some graphic organizers. This is all from Avid, open access, so that means that they're all free, and they are great. So if you're a homeschool mom, or you're a teacher with limited resources, or just someone who's working with their kids, these are some graphic organizers. So you can see there's categorizing, there's a 3-column organizer, there's Frayer, which is for vocabulary. They have all these different things, main idea and details, and diagram. They had exit tickets, which are just things that you could do to help assess understanding. We have KWL, which is what you do before you read. K is what you know about a topic. W is what you want to read. And then L you do actually as you're reading or at the end of your reading. What you learn. We've got all these different things. Again, they've got main idea and details. We've got, these are a little more advanced, character analysis, plot diagram, problem solving, and creative thinking skills. And so graphic organizers really help students, especially who are struggling, or if it's a very hard text. A text means a piece of writing, and if that text is hard for students, often doing graphic organizer really helps. The graphic organizers are, again, especially good for struggling students who may have disabilities or who may be English learners. And there's a wide variety of them. And some of them, like thinking maps, it's a very popular type, and those are really good. They're under copyright, however. So I've chosen to show you this group of open source graphic organizers that you can use anytime. And I'm going to do an example of a graphic organizer, and show you using the gradual release of responsibilities. What the gradual release of responsibility is steps that you take to help the student to learn the strategy. Strategy is a way that you do things. So here, strategy is graphic organizer to help you understand a text that may be difficult, like an informational text, or a literary text, something that might be hard for the student. And we do I do, which is where the teacher does it. We do, which is where you do it together. And in some cases, you'll see they do, which is where students do it like in pairs or in small groups. That works in a classroom setting. But for purposes of this video, when we're talking more about something that might happen one-on-one or in a small group, I'm going to skip to you do, which is where the student does the work on their own. And this can actually happen very quickly. I think people think that sometimes you need, really long lessons. But this can actually happen really quickly when going through a text. So I'm going to do problem and solution. I'm going to do cause and effect. And I chose something that is pretty prevalent for today, and that's the Iranian Revolution. And I chose that because Iran and the United States are having some problems right now. There's a conflict involving Iran, Israel, and the United States. And a lot of students don't have good background about what that conflict is about the history of the Middle East. There are a lot of assumptions that aren't true. For example, people think that the people in Iran are Arabs. They're not. They're Persians, a very different culture. And there's just a lot of global misunderstanding about what's going on right now. So I chose a text that is also free. This is from open source textbooks, and I'm going to put the link in the bottom in the description box, because this is also a very good resource. It's totally free for anyone. So if you're a parent looking for information, and you've got students, the textbooks here are very well written. However, they're kind of difficult. They're usually for college level. So this would be something that you might use if you've got like a high schooler or a student who's very advanced, or even a student in college. So it's a difficult text, and that's one of the reasons why I chose it. So I'm going to go through how we're going to do this. So I'm going to move this over here just to make it easier. So I'm going to show you just how one paragraph can be digested. And if you are reading, listening to this or watching this, and you're familiar with the close reading, this is something that is similar to that, where you have a really, really hard text and you pay attention to the details. And you might spend a little bit of time just on each paragraph because it's a hard text for students, and there might be a lot to the text. Now, close reading, you do a lot of different things traditionally with that text. You might do 4 or 5 different strategies, but for this case, we're just doing one strategy, and I think that's fair. I think that more than that, it's a lot for students. So I'm going to model one strategy, which is finding cause and effect. So cause is what happens. The cause leads to the effect. So the effect is what happens after the cause. And so this is kind of a critical thinking skill. So I'm going to read this paragraph first. It said, Khomeini's political victory had enormous ramifications for Iran. This obviously permitted the Ayatollah and his supporters to impose a sweeping Islamic revolution on the country. They wasted no time in doing so. The new government immediately banned alcohol and most Western movies, quickly closed newspapers that did not adhere to the official line, held school teachers to adopt a stop-still curriculum developed by the state, launched a violent campaign to Islamicize the universities, and reimposed Sharia law, including traditional criminal penalties such as flogging. No group felt the effects of the communist social revolution more than did women. The regime required them to veil, revoked the rights that they had received under the family protection law, discouraged them from wearing Western clothing, forced them from Judaism to Sharia teaching, reimposed gender segregation, and even revived practices such as child marriage. Implemented at breakneck speed, the changes that Khomeini had opposed were far-reaching and constituted a true social revolution, one that changed Iran into a visibly different country than it had been just a few years earlier. So that's the paragraph. And kind of backing up, students would need to know some information about what is going on here. So the Ayatollah is the ruler under Islamic law in Iran, and this happened in the late 1970s. I believe it was 1979. And so students would need to know that information. So that's one thing that's important, kind of just to give context for students. But going to the graphic organizer, I already have a cause. The Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme ruler of Iran. So for the I do, the teacher, if I pretend I'm the teacher, would say, the government banned alcohol. That's one effect. That's one thing that happened. Now, for the we do, you might say, okay, well, what's something that you think happened? And the student might say, well, I just really don't know. And you might say, okay, well, let's look at this together. So you might read a sentence, or you might reread the paragraph, and I'm not going to do that now, and together come up with a meaning. It's a violent campaign. And so the student might do that. And then the student, on their own, would come up with an effect. So the student would read it, and the student might say, okay, well, I see how women were required to veil. That was a new thing. Now, why would we do this? Just so that the student could find information? That's good. But overall, what we would take is, based on critical thinking, the student would say, wow, this place is really different than it was before 1979. So then that's kind of a summary. The idea that the student saw what had happened and put it all together. So the student might say at the end, after 1979, Iran was a very different, it's late at night and my typing skills aren't the best, different place. So then the student has taken the cause and effect and looked at it and come up with a big effect that helps the student to understand what's going on. So again, there's always different graphic organizers here that you can use. Let me get the right slide here. There's all kinds of things. There's predictions, which is where you guess about what's going to happen. There's perspectives, point of view. Very good when you're looking at like historical documents, all kinds of problem and solution. Analysis, pro-con analysis, that's good for like debate. There's sequencing, which is what happens, which may be good, especially in literature, or if you're talking about something maybe in history that happened. And these just help the student to understand what's going on. And then they've got writing, which I haven't done much with. Maybe in a future video I'll do something with writing. But it's very hard for students to just sit down and write. Students, you generally need some kind of an organizer for what they do. Even when I was in graduate school and I was doing my dissertation, I used graphic organizers, particularly in outline, because there's just was so much that I had to write. It was hard to keep it organized. So those are just some examples of things that you can do with students to help them. And I want to know, have you used graphic organizers in your practice, either as a student or as a teacher or a homeschool parent, someone who's working with students, a tutor, or just a parent who's supporting their student through school? I want to know your experiences with using graphic organizers. What are your favorites? What do you not like about it? There's again, kind of a controversy over whether to use these or not, even though the literature shows that they're very, very powerful. Some school systems don't use them, and some curriculums don't use them as much as others. I would love to hear what you think. So please comment in the comment section. And thanks so much. And until next time, keep learning.